Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're going to give a minute or two for everyone to join, and then we'll get going. Give it just another minute or so. All right. I think we can go ahead and get started. So, thank you everyone for joining us for our panel today on the Fleet Savings Playbook. We're going to feature some research and insights on fleet management from Coast, Truce, and Rancho Mesa Insurance Services. I'm Dylan. I'm the Director of Partnerships at Applause, and we're excited to dive in here and share some strategies on how you can save some money on your fleets. First, a high-level look at the report for those who haven't had a chance to maybe check it out yet. Most fleet operators are leaving six, maybe even seven figures on the table every year, and they don't realize it because the costs can be spread across many different categories, including fuel, insurance, accidents, and even fraud and misuse. A sizable portion of those costs are totally preventable. For example, at the average industry accident rate, annual accident costs a 250 truck fleet 400K per year. But fleets using telematics can reduce accident rates by about 25%. And when you layer in dash cams and coaching programs, that number can reach 40%. Then there's fuel. Fuel is about 60% of fleet operating costs. More now with prices rising, as many of you have seen. Turns out that a lot of this fuel, a lot of the fuel costs can even be attributed to things like fraud and misuse, which we'll get in with Coast. And then there's insurance, which is arguably the biggest savings opportunity. Underwriters reward documented safety programs, and companies that show a downward claims trend, telematics usage, and a real coaching program are seeing premium reductions of 10% or more at renewal. Operators who enforce and can prove safe driving across the board see a 3x to 7x return on investment in the first year of bringing all these different pieces together. And those savings can compound each year afterwards. One thing I want to flag up front as we get into this, most of this research was conducted and put together when gas was under $3 a gallon. Obviously, prices have climbed quite a bit, over 30% in some cases, which means that fuel savings that we'll discuss today are going to be conservative. Gas is over $4 a gallon in most places, $5 depending on the state that you're in. So the ROI on fuel management is even bigger. So our panel today is going to dig into all of these different pieces and parts and show you how over the course of a 1 or 2 year journey, you can save some more money on your fleet. Before we dive in, I'm going to cover a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions, please drop them into the Q&A chat. We've set aside some time at the end to get through as many of your questions as we can. And then if you run into any technical issues, feel free to message in the chat as we go along, and our team will help you out. With that, let's introduce our speakers today. Dylan, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Excellent. Yes, thank you. Dylan Burno, I'm the head of customer success at Coast, a fleet and fuel payments company.
Great name. Thanks, Dylan. Greg, you want to introduce yourself next?
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Greg Garcia. I'm an insurance agent over at Rancho Mesa Insurance. Our company is based out of San Diego, California, and really excited to be on this panel today to talk about this.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. David, you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. David Coleman, head of commercial solutions at Truce Software. I'm personally located in Baltimore, Maryland, but we're spread throughout the country.
And then Joel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Joel Ragar, VP of Product over at Applause, calling in from Utah.
Nice. All right, guys, let's start to jump into the questions. I think probably top of mind for everyone is fuel. So we're gonna start there, Dylan. Um, as gas is over $4 a gallon, like I mentioned, let's jump into how you're seeing smart fleets take back control of what they're spending at the pump.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a good place to start, especially given where we're at right now. This is coming up daily. Within the same zip code, prices vary by up to 30 cents per gallon between stations. Our data shows the average fleet fueled at overpriced stations 10% above like market rate, two or more times a week in 2025. That's real cash leaking out of the business one swipe at a time. Proactive fleets are taking control by running their fuel program on a platform that's two things at once: monitors spend at the driver and location level, and knows local pump prices and partner rebates in real time. So that combination is what makes real behavioral change possible. You can see which driver is pulling into the expensive station on Route 4 when there's a partner station with a better rebate 2 blocks away, and you can coach to it. So, what we do is we really partner with fleets to shift about 20% of fueling behavior, specific drivers, specific stations and routes. It's really all it takes, 20%, that light lift, and they see a meaningful cost improvement from the shift.
I like that a lot. Joel, I want to bring you in here as well. Our research shows that driving behavior has a huge impact on fuel, as Dylan just mentioned. And for a typical light duty truck, speeding at highway speeds can burn more fuel, obviously, especially if you're over the limit. And idling adds up too. Light duty trucks can burn about a third to half a gallon per hour just idling. At $4 a gallon, that all adds up fast. As Dylan talked about changing behavior, how does tracking behaviors in a tool like Applause help fleet owners reduce their fuel waste? And then maybe one additional part, beyond speeding and idling, can you talk about how reservices or callbacks can exacerbate that?
Yeah, absolutely. The interesting thing when we start to interview technicians and then we start interviewing their managers is I think everyone starts to realize this is a problem and an issue, but they don't always know what to do or where to look. And so the benefit of using a tracking tool like Applause or anything else you're doing is it helps make most of this in a very transparent way to align where the issues are. So when we talk about driving, and specifically in reservice rates, we often forget that a resurface rate, it costs what they call rolling a truck. So how much does it cost to go to a location and have that technician perform another service that was already serviced? And what happens is you cluster everything in routes. And so you may be in one neighborhood one day and in a completely different neighborhood in a different area the next day. But if you're doing a resurface, then you're driving across town back to the previous neighborhood. And so as you start to match up and make transparent the resurface rates, for example, as well as the driving behavior from the technician, you can tie that down to fuel cost usage and Applause. So we can use metric calculations to allow everyone to see per technician and per route and per branch and office what their actual fuel spend is or what their likely fuel spend is just by their efficiency scores that you can build. So I think when you make it very transparent, all of us, we start to open our eyes very quickly to say, that doesn't seem right. I think we need to spend a little more time figuring that out. And that's the start of what we want to let everyone recognize is where to actually begin looking and identifying areas to improve.
Yeah, and maybe as we stay on that topic of behavior, Dylan, I think Coast found that 6 to 15% of fleet fuel spend can be lost to fraud and misuse. Things like unauthorized purchases, overpriced stations. With gas where it is right now, walk us through how fuel cards can actually help catch those types of things in real time.
Definitely. And yeah, when we analyzed why transactions were declined across thousands of fleets, the breakdown was pretty clear. We saw 35% exceeded spending limits, 29% were unauthorized merchant categories, 15% were outside of approved time windows. When a driver swipes, your card's already working with like the modern card. The card talks to the vehicle and the station in real time. It knows which truck is at the pump, what the truck's tank can actually hold, and whether the purchase matches your rules for that driver, that merchant, and during that hour. Swipe at a station the vehicle isn't parked at will get declined. You add 25 gallons to a 20-gallon tank, we alert the admin. The value is immense. Fleet ops and finance leaders can focus on exceptions rather than what's in policy.
And David, Dylan mentioned a few things there in terms of tracking the vehicle. Can you talk to why GPS data, telematics, when you combine those two together, can be such a powerful program?
Yeah, absolutely. So the connected vehicle data that's coming from telematics, both location as well as the things that Dylan just pointed out, tank capacity. These are dimensions of data that you need. So when somebody's pumping 10 gallons of fuel into a vehicle, you don't have a tank capacity that's only 5, right? So when fuel prices are where they're at, you see quite a bit of that leakage. So that's one dimension. The connected vehicle data complements the card controls that Dylan's team's providing. And then the other side of this, you think about unauthorized use of a vehicle, unnecessary miles driven. We talked about idle time. There are a lot of things that kind of fit into behavioral characteristics that cause unnecessary fuel burn. So telematics is a key connected vehicle attribute that feeds how you want to incentivize people to drive differently, and also on the card control side as well.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Dylan, maybe sum it up for us. Um, on average, what do you see in terms of someone using a fuel card versus not? Can they save per vehicle?
Yeah, so we've really surveyed our customer base to really understand this and understand how we can continue enhancing it. Our customers tell us they save $471 per vehicle. And that's really before they've done a lot of the optimization work with us. Savings come from really like three levers we work with on our customers: a partner station mix, what percentage of transactions earn a rebate, cost per gallon against regional pricing, and rebate per gallon pulled by driver and by location. So the recipe's pretty straightforward. Find the nearby partner stations with the strongest rebate per gallon, the lowest pump prices, and then redirect behavior towards those. And small shifts really compound fast across the fleet.
Yeah, fuel is definitely an area where people are thinking about it right now. So thanks for that. I want to transition a little bit onto accidents. That's a whole other area where people can look for savings. It's connected to fuel too. If you have an accident, that means you have a rerouted truck, maybe a missed appointment, extra drive time that you weren't thinking about. Uh, David, how does telematics really help reduce accidents?
Yeah, absolutely. What's key here is if you think about your vehicle sitting in a driveway, it's not at risk for a crash until somebody gets behind the wheel. So the second somebody gets behind the wheel, that person's skill, their personal choices, their risk signature contribute to, the likelihood of being in an accident. So, leveraging that data, changing how people think about working for your company. So people work hard, but they drive hard. So leveraging that telematics data to, complement with scoring and letting them know how they're doing, where they rank in the leaderboard, physically changing how they think about driving, that then lowers the risk. And the lower my risk signature is as a driver, the less likely, I'm going to be in an accident. Accident has three dimensions, frequency, severity, and cost. So leverage the telematics data to change the risk signature and the performance signature of the driving. You're going to get the benefit, as we've talked about with fuel, but you now have a lower risk profile, less likely to be in an accident.
Yeah, I like that on the lower risk profile part. Greg, I want to start to pull you in here from that insurance angle. What does it mean for premiums when a company can show that downward decline in risk or a downward trend in accidents?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for any underwriter that's looking at an account, they're looking at two indicators. They have lagging indicators, which would be 5 years of loss run history. So any underwriter is going to need to collect that data in order to create a premium for that account. But now they're also looking at leading indicators, and that would be how they project this company moving forward. So being able to show data that, yeah, the trends, we're having less auto accidents year after year, and here's why, is super critical for an underwriter to get the most aggressive they can in giving out their subjective credits for that said account. But it's definitely something that they're going to be looking at year after year come renewal time for sure.
Yeah, and along the same line of those accidents, David, distracted driving came up as arguably the highest stakes metric in the research.
Mhm.
Incidents can cost, in some cases over 70 grand. It just, and I think you've said that a lot of owners know that this is a problem, right? Their drivers using their phones, or I think I've heard you say that the most responsive technicians are great assets to the business, but also can sometimes come at a higher risk. Talk a little bit about how dash cams, distracted driver programs can actually change behavior and reduce risk.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as an industry, we're doing everything we can with mobility, right? Leveraging applications, mobile devices. It's just part of who we are. I mean, most people are no more than about 6 feet away from their device at any time. The devices are engineered for your attention. So, God forbid you don't look at it for a couple seconds. So, yeah, application developers, uh, corporate apps, corporate email, most responsive employees are actually your highest risk because they are your most responsive employees. So they're engaged with the business, and being engaged with the business, in today's world means being engaged with a mobile device. When that happens while driving, that has, kind of catastrophic issues. In the dash cam world, dash cams, legacy dash cams, I think have done a pretty good job of capturing the data, prompting the employee to stop the activity, but we're dealing with kind of an addiction. So, we do have the ability today to engineer out distracted driving, automatically enforce, appropriate policy, get the device out of the picture. So now your best employees continue to be your most responsive, but we've removed the temptation of the device to distract them. So once that's done, then the dash cams really can provide additional value, forward facing, inward facing for things like seatbelt, et cetera. So I like to call it take driving back to the 80s before people had a phone, kind of start there. By eliminating device distracted driving, you're going to see a pretty immediate change in the risk profile, especially with things like rear end collisions. And then let the dash cams do the rest of the work. In many cases, I think uh, that translates into being able to settle claims quickly if you are not doing the right thing, but subrogate when the dash cams show that you're not actually at fault. So quite a bit of value in the dash cams. But yeah, get rid of the device distracted driving.
I like how you talked about engineering those solutions. Joel, when we look at tracking technician performance, how can that help as well to prevent distracted driving?
Another thing that's we always encourage everyone to remember is for those on this call and many in this industry, there often isn't a driving test when you hire someone. You don't take them out in the car and say, all right, show me a left turn lane. And are you using your signal? We just say, can you drive? Do you have a driver's license? Maybe you'll pull a quick record. And that record doesn't always show their actual behavior. And so using telematics and then pulling that data in using Applause or some tool like that, you actually get a full bio on how technicians are performing. The other thing that's really important to remember is most people have been driving well before your job or when they started with you. So they already have these habits. And when you put someone in a new situation, they're now spraying, using chemicals, getting to appointments on time. There's a lot going through their brain. They say to themselves, I already know how to drive. So I just need to get here and then learn the new skill or keep improving the skill of servicing whatever that would be at a consumer's home. And so they just don't think when you say you're a bad driver, they say, I'm not a bad driver. I've never thought about it that way in the way that you are actually putting together the profile or lens of a good or a bad driver. So seatbelt usage, maybe they just didn't grow up in a spot where that was actually ever enforced. They never think about it. Speeding, the rolling stop, using a blinker, turning, these would be things that maybe they just never ever think about. And so when you start to track it, you can bring this transparency and awareness to someone where they actually see it for the first time and get a heads up to be like, oh, I didn't realize that was an issue. My job and goal was not to be a bad driver. I just never thought about those things. And so it's really important that we just have a transparency of this is the way the company expects to operate. And when you're out in our logoed vehicles, this is how you should be operating, and then you give them the ability to actually see that. Often we hear that when someone's looking at their metrics of driving or other performance indicators, it's retroactively for the past month. So they're looking at it after everything's happened. And we want to bring that transparency as close to the events as possible and make it as easy and accessible as possible. And that's where we find the greatest change happens when implementing fleet management and the car tracking and applause metric match tracking. You actually can show everyone from leadership down to the individual. Here's the goals of the company. Here's how we want to operate in these different areas, such as driving. And then everyone can see and measure for themselves. As David mentioned, there's leaderboards. There's plenty of fun things you can do about it. Most people do not want to be a bad driver or perform bad as the company has set out expectations. And so they'll usually rise to the challenge. They just need to be made aware and then give a standard from the company.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Now, when it comes to implementing these programs, David, I think we see a lot of the benefits, obviously, or at least reduction on the risk. One of the biggest concerns that we hear from our customers and operators is pushback from their crews, especially on the inward facing cameras. What have you seen work in practice to get drivers on board with this type of program?
Yeah, I think whether it's telematics or it's dash cams, forward facing or inward facing, we got to stop thinking about these technologies as something that we can do to people, right? So the last thing you want to do is take your best employees, right, your people, and you have a hardworking individual, and then you're telling them the bad things that they do. And I think Joe, you pointed out after a month, I find out I'm a bad driver. I've been working hard for you for a month and not really happy about having a conversation now about what a bad driver I am, bad employee when I've been working this hard. So I think we have an opportunity now to flip that model over. Start with the employee. What's the benefit to the employee? Joel pointed out, giving transparency to the employee. Well, if the employee and everybody's got a mobile device, so when they have their scores, when they have their performance dashboard, provided by Applause, they have their driving scores provided by Truce. When those things are in an employee's hands, they have every opportunity to make a different decision on the next drive. So, now you can not only be the best employee, but you can also be the highest performance and safest driver. It's that level of transparency, right? We want to treat people as adults. They work hard for your company. Give them the tools, give them the visibility first and foremost. And when that visibility and performance can then be matched against some rewards, then you've created a culture where you've empowered employees to be their best, not a punitive culture of trying to catch somebody speeding. Let's treat people like adults, give them the tools to monitor their own performance and safety. When that is the culture, then the resistance is generally much lower because your best technicians who are next in line for promotion, no surprise, they're generally the ones that are also the highest performing on the driving leaderboard. They also have the most unexplained absences. They also generally have the highest customer scores. So people that compete organically to be the best. So yeah, start with the drivers, give them employees, give them transparency.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that building that type of a culture is a great way to get started and reinforce it. Dylan, if we loop back around to the fuel side, if they build a culture like David's talking about, what can companies see in terms of savings, in terms of more effectiveness on the fuel side when the drivers are cleaning up their behavior and they're reducing the risk, increasing their safe driver scores?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's, building on what David said around building that type of culture, that like directly correlates into what we're doing with how we're, working with fleet leaders to coach their drivers on like subtle behavior changes. Again, it's not like 10 out of 10 transactions need to go to these partner stations with the highest rebate that might be out of the way sometimes. But if you get 2 out of 10 and then 4 out of 10 going there, we're talking about thousands of dollars a year. And like, building on that as an example is when, our customers use telematics, we've seen them save 30K annually on average, which is 72% more than customers without telematics. It's driven through smart controls where you can alert admins based on vehicle tank capacity versus gallons fueled, vehicle GPS versus gas station location, vehicle fuel grade versus the grade they fueled with, and blocking expensive stations, especially ones with lower partner rebates. So when you like bundle all of that together and complement it with a culture that has like, folks trying to be the leader, that's when you really like see the proof at the end of it.
I like that a lot. And it's pretty mind-boggling that, just using a fuel card can help a lot, but then adding telematics on top of it, like I think you said a 72% higher savings. That's pretty impressive. Um, Joel, I want to loop back around to you real quickly. When it comes to accountability for the safe driving program, walk us through what accountability looks like on a day-to-day basis and why making all of this visible to somebody, as David was talking about, matters so much.
One of the most important things to think about in this area, from our opinion, is that when you treat someone professionally, they usually reciprocate that and they want to work professionally. And having transparency in performance and numbers helps really breed that. And so when we're thinking about employees, I think inherently most employees want to do a great job. And so the more that you help them understand, hey, by the way, we have an insurance renewal coming up, or here's our goal of what's happening across the business. We're rolling out these new telematics or these tracking or these fuel cards because it actually helps our business. And so you're playing a part in supporting our business. And here's how we're going to set those goals up. And here's how it's going to benefit you because when you do this, here's how the business improves. And so we're working together. We all want to feel like we're part of a team. And so when we actually don't just talk about it, but then get them involved in watching performance, having leaderboards so we can see that, you're going to see obviously your best performance or performers immediately improve, even if it's only a couple points. But that widens the gap for all other employees that maybe weren't as focused or naturally aren't your best performers. And that then pushes them to go a little higher themselves. Nobody wants to be on the bottom of the leaderboard. Nobody generally wants to perform and do a bad job. And again, if there's a bad apple, then maybe it's time to move on from them anyways. But if you can get people, your employees, to kind of align with the business to say, hey, we introduced this tracking software in the cars because it's really going to help our business and it's going to support, and this is our goals and growth, and this is what we're really trying to do. And our mantra as a business is we care about customers. And so when we put these metrics in place, it's just reminders for all of us to measure ourselves and hopefully get better next month, all in turn for trying to grow. And so what we found really is the more that we just involve employees for appropriate level of metrics and data, there is some across the company that are sensitive and shouldn't, but anything that an employee has the discipline to actually change or is involved in, we believe they should have transparency to it. They're the ones doing it. They're the ones being measured on it. And they should immediately be able to see that instantly daily, with chances of leaderboards, rewards, and bonuses that you can set up to just really move the needle. And our highest recommendation is that you're changing those metrics, you're changing those values, those bonus programs, making them dynamic. They should be responsive to whatever the business needs. And so if you introduce telematics and it gets really good and everything's improved, and you look at it and you're like, you know what, we really improved and moved the needle on it, but we're noticing seatbelts. Change the focus just to seatbelts for a month or for a while. And then, or help really identify and turn into one-on-one coaching and very specifics per employee that would help the whole company rise together and say, again, this is a goal as a company we're trying to hit. If you would do this, this would support the team. And we feel a lot more positive and influential peer pressure to support a greater team than just ourselves. And so moving that needle or moving the conversation from just what is it about me, either positive or negative, to here's the team and let's grow together. I think really helps companies improve.
Yeah, I love those points on just building that culture. David, you and Joel have really hit on that. Greg, that brings up a question. If you build that safety culture and you track this information on driving behavior, how does that help when it comes to negotiating premiums?
Yeah, no, great question. There's been a lot of great points that have been brought up in this webinar so far. And I think with the commercial auto market as a whole, it just continues to have a ton of pressure on it. So what that means is there's less carrier appetite. So not a lot of carriers are willing to write commercial auto anymore. And underwriting scrutiny has really heightened as well. And what I mean by that is typically maybe 5 years ago, an underwriter would just look at the loss runs and say, yeah, this company's performing, this is where we're going to place their premiums at. But because the commercial auto market has just been such a challenge for carriers to be profitable on, they've really had to tighten down on their subjective credits that they're able to allow to an account. So one of the things that we've seen a big shift in is looking at driver trainings. What is this company doing to train their drivers? Do they have internal guidelines of what it meant to be a driver for the company? I think gone are the days where they want to see employers just say, yeah, I just send the MVRs to my insurance agent. They run the MVRs and they tell me if this driver is good or not. What carriers want to see now is really have the employer take the initiative of what it takes to be a driver for ABC company or whatever the company name might be, and have guidelines that are set in. And now being able to be able to track drivers in real time with some of these new technologies coming out is super critical, and something that I use in my negotiating tactics with carriers, because I can say, hey, they're doing driver trainings annually, and they're also doing real-time trainings, right? When there's something that's going on, this driver has been speeding 3 or 4 times this month, they can bring that driver into the office, try to correct that behavior right away, rather than waiting for an accident to happen based on that driver speeding too much, and now they're being reactive instead of being proactive. And at the end of the day, that's what the carriers want to see, is they want to see you, the employer, being proactive in your fleet management and your fleet safety. And it starts with, like Joel mentioned, who's getting behind the wheel of your company vehicles. That's your guys' biggest liability for sure.
I like that a lot. I think maybe a tangible example could help too, to bring some of this together. So, Joel, in the guide that we put together, we had a case study on Anthem Pest Control, one of our good clients, and they implemented a telematics program, an incentive program. Can you talk a little bit about the results that they saw and what made them so successful?
Yeah, the fun thing about this Anthem case study we did is we actually have multiple of these. And so this isn't just a one-time thing that happened across one environment and company. And this is repeatable, which means everyone here on the call or listening in, they can do the same thing. As they entered a telematics agreement and brought that into their fleet, and then they started adding, specifically, they used applause, but you could use whatever you're doing manually or another tool to bring in all that data and make it very transparent to the technician, created bonus awareness and expectations from the company. It resulted in 70% reduction in at-fault accidents over 2 years, which when we start talking about these numbers, as we did at the top of the call, that is an incredible amount. And that is a multiple of however many vehicles you have on the road and whatever your growth rate is. But if I would assume everyone would raise their hand and say, yes, I'll take a 70% reduction in the at-fault accidents. That's massive for any of these companies with cars moving around. The other thing that was cool to see is their average driving score. This would be a performance of multiple metrics blended together. That if you were using David's company, they have a proprietary score they've put together. And so you're watching that. That on average, just in 8 months, moved everyone up. The whole average went up 10 points. And so this isn't just your best performers. They would have gone a lot farther, but it was over 10 points improvement across the entire company. And so when you talk about or listen into what Greg was talking about, these are those markers that they're looking for to say, do we see this improvement or not? Or you talk about all the stuff you're doing, but we don't see it in the data. And that's what we want to make sure some of the positioning that Applause is trying to do is help companies is literally monitor and watch this data and performance and tie it back to what is actually happening. If you have a story you can tell, as Anthem did, then it goes back to which they did is they were on monthly coaching and they moved it down to daily coaching. Immediately when infractions were happening, they could see it, the technician could see it, or the driver could see it, self-coaching on their side, and then management had better access to really pinpoint and truly identify exactly what needed to be done. And so this Anthem case study, we would hope for everyone. It just changes the culture across the company and allows everyone to self-serve as well as give better transparency to management to go in there and coach on a more real-time basis as well. But fun to see those metrics happen across customers.
I like that story a lot, especially because this is a multi-year journey, right, for them. Greg, one of the questions we get and one of the things that came out in our research was customers asking, "Hey, how can I, save money on my insurance right away?" And I think you've helped us understand that this is a journey that you might have to go on. So help us understand what year one versus year 2 years versus year three could look like in those renewal conversations.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And something that I typically get a lot from my clients as well is, hey, if I'm investing in telematics or if I'm investing in some fleet safety trainings, what can I expect? Where's my return on investment? And I have yet to find a carrier that says, yeah, if you use telematics, you're going to get 10% discounted, from your insurance premiums. What I have found that if you have two companies, right, you have a company with zero losses over the last 5 years on their commercial auto, and then you have another company with the same no losses for the last 5 years, but company number two has implemented telematics. They do annual driver trainings. They have a strong fleet safety system. They do vehicle inspection reports, all of those things that employer number two will get a better pricing than employer number one, because what Joel talked about, their underwriters are looking for those leading indicators. Okay, they've had no losses over the last 5 years, but let's project this company out. How are they going to project over the next 5 years? And by putting these things in place, the GPS, the dual face dash cams, the driver trainings, it gives that underwriter confidence to go ahead and say, yeah, I want to price this account more aggressively because I know if they don't have claims, our carrier becomes profitable because we're not paying out on any claim costs. So I would say, for any of those people out there listening to this webinar that don't have any of these things implemented or haven't taken a look at their fleet safety training in the last 12 months, now is a good time to start, and just also understand from a market standpoint that the commercial auto market is just going to continue to harden. It's not getting any easier. So what you need to do now is try to separate yourself from your competitors in the marketplace to these underwriters in order to get the best pricing you can get come renewal time.
That's really helpful. And one thing that I thought you said that I thought was really interesting was two companies with the same loss history, one using telematics, one not, could often get different pricing. David, I want to bring you back in and ask your perspective on that. Why do you think carriers, or what have you guys seen in terms of why carriers value that so much?
Yeah, I think, speaking for Greg, the carriers have seen over the years the companies that have implemented technology plus controls, have a reduction in frequency, severity, cost to crash. So they're a better risk actually to place in insurance. But it doesn't mean the individual company, because your insurance is based on you as a company. So yeah, I mean, for two companies, one that has telematics, one that doesn't, the one that has telematics at least has kind of the bones for a better conversation for Greg to have with underwriters to negotiate. And if for folks on the call, like one of the major takeaways here is like insurance discount may end up being kind of a lagging value, right? Because if you don't do it today, next year's negotiation is not going to get better, and the year after that's even going to get worse. But the entire ROI cost justification, as our emphasis on fuel, even at 285 a gallon, this solution stack that we're talking about can be cost justified. And then you're in a better position for insurance negotiations because you've demonstrated the result. So, two companies, A, B, I'd much rather be A and be doing a better job of performance and safety, saving on fuel, life cycle costs on the vehicle, wear and tear, tires and brakes, everything that you could do immediately. And then again, because of the power of these, every one of these devices becomes kind of that performance and safety coach. So, the last thing I'll say here is the other big question I would have if I was on the call, like who's got time to manage these systems, right? Because we're working hard to drive our business. Well, in today's world of mobile technology, mobile applications, by moving the data directly to the employee, by letting them be the first line of defense, these are kind of it's like a healing environment. They'll become organically better through scoring and gamification and coaching. You'll get the immediate ROI fuel initially, and then better position for negotiation when Greg can place you with a carrier.
Yeah, I think that that's really helpful context, and the 2 year timeline is really helpful, I think, for people. But I sometimes I think it's worth pointing out that there are things that we can do right now, right? Taking a first step. So, Dylan, I think one of the again probably top of mind for everybody is fuel. When a fleet switches to a modern fuel card, how quickly can they see savings happen?
Yeah, so fleets see them quickly. We've been talking about how quickly savings show up with the modern fleet card program a bit, and it really comes down to 3 points in the workflow: before, during, and after spend. Before spend, there's control, card limits, category rules, and approvals keep every purchase in policy. When spend happens, it's about visibility. Platform surfaces flag transactions, exceptions, and ROI opportunities the moment they happen, gives you direction for how to act. And after spend, it's reconciliation. So auto categorization, coding, and integrations give finance teams organized data directly where they work. And when you have all 3 points living in one platform, the savings like tend to show up in the first month.
Wow, that's quick. Maybe for the other panelists, David, Joel, Greg, um, what's one tangible takeaway someone on this webinar could do this week to focus on the fleet?
I would slow people down immediately. There's each category of driving behavior, whether it's aggressive driving or braking, acceleration, the things that where people are working hard, they're driving hard. They're not necessarily working hard, but then driving gently. If we can slow people down, top end speed, bring that down. But the categories, of different behaviors add up very, very quickly. But yeah, slow people down immediately.
Yeah, I would kind of echo that as well as maybe in the coming weeks, get the team together and go over a driver training, whether that be distracted driving, following too close, one of those things to bring it top of mind to the team that, I think a lot of times I work with a lot of contractors and the emphasis is on safety when they're doing the job, when they're performing the landscape operation or the install work. But what's happening beforehand and before they actually get to the job site, there's a huge liability that I think gets missed. So bringing that top of mind that's saying, hey, safety really starts right when you get into that company vehicle, and taking this seriously and doing these trainings is super critical. So that could be a tangible thing that people could walk away with today is saying, hey, in the next 2 weeks, let's get a company, all of our drivers together, and let's go through one of these trainings. There's tons of content out there on the web that you can find to get that training done for sure. So I would echo David on that as well.
I like that a lot. It's like safety starts when you get in the truck.
Yeah.
It's not when you're at the job site handling the chemicals or getting on a ladder or starting to do the work, moving heavy stuff. I think that's a really great point. Joel, do you want to add in here?
Yeah, I would add one other instruction, and that would be to pick a few metrics and immediately audit them this week. We pull in Applause partners with lots of data source to pull in the literal data of your business. And what we find sometimes comically to the business owners, they say, "Oh no, I know this. This is great. We have this down." And they just haven't looked at the data in a while. It pulls in and it literally will translate and show them exactly how things are operating. They say, "There's no way that's right." And then we chase the numbers down. They're like, "I was way off." like my speeding or my driving, my reservice rate on gas usage, of any other of these details. They're like, I just haven't thought about it in months. I thought everything was fine. And that's appropriate. We all do that from time to time, but I would choose a couple metrics that you probably feel you're confident in this telematics space. Go audit the metrics, see where you guys actually stand today, because that should correct what you start instruction on tomorrow.
That's great. Love it. Well, thank you to all our panelists. I think that was a great discussion. We covered a lot of ground. I know there's a few questions in the chat, so let's get to a couple of those here. I think the first one that I think is maybe for Greg, and then maybe David, you can add in on this. We talked during the Anthem case study about I think they had like a 10-point increase at a company level. How many points on an aggregate driver score for a person or for a company does it have to go up before an insurance carrier actually cares about it?
Yeah, I don't know if there's and I wish it was more black and white with insurance because these questions I get all the time, and I wish I had to like, yeah, A plus B equals C, but it never equates to that. All I can say is that if you have data that shows that you have safe drivers, you're implementing a great fleet safety program, you're doing your vehicle inspection reports, and you're not having claims, that gives your broker, myself, a ton of ammunition to go to that carrier and say, hey, this is a profitable business for you, said carrier. You need to get aggressive to go write this account based on other carriers wanting to write this account because they do all these things that make them a safe company. So I wish I had more of a definitive answer on that. I really don't. But I would say all of those things accumulate to a lot of good things that can happen for your insurance renewal premium. But there isn't a set like once you get here, this is going to happen. And again, what I don't want to be thought out there for those on this webinar is that if you get telematics, I judge an insurance renewal premium on cost per unit. So you take your number of power units and you divide that by your annual auto insurance cost, auto insurance premium, and that spits out a blended cost per unit. Obviously, a 2026 Ford F-150 is going to cost more to insure than a 2006 F-150, but the cost per unit kind of gives you a blended average. And what I don't want people to think is like if we install telematics and we do all these things, our cost per unit will go down. I don't think that's going to be the case. However, I think the increases that you would see if you didn't implement these things would be greater than had you not done it. So that's where you're going to see the savings. It's not going to be you're going to pay less this year than you did last year type of thing, but it's going to be moving forward. That increase just won't be as extravagant as maybe some of your competitors or peers. So not the best answer, I know. I wish I had a more calculated formula, but it's a lot of gray area with insurance.
I
Yeah,
think that's
in
helpful.
Greg's world, there's no such thing as bad risk. There's unpriced for risk,
Yeah.
right? So, the goal is to hand Greg the ability to price your risk. So the way to get there, right, the lagging indicators, you had a crash. That's bad. But the way we think about scores is kind of A, B, C, D, like grades in school. There's no reason that an employee for your company can't drive, in the A category, 90 to 100 from a score standpoint. They're probably 50, 60 today, right? Especially when you introduce phone use and things like that. Well, your insurance is priced on that experience that results in incidents. Well, we can immediately change and get everybody up to an A through all the competitive approaches we talked about in scoring gamification. That then gives Greg what he needs to price your risk.
I like that. And again, for everyone on the webinar, if you want to put some questions in the chat, just hit the Q&A button at the bottom. But another one we have here for Dylan, what's a realistic timeline to roll out a fuel card like Coast?
Yeah. Most fleets are up and running in a week or two with Coast. We built a set of process to move as fast as really a fleet's ready to move. You could look at it as like a couple tracks that we run in parallel. We have the field track that gets drivers operational, cards issued, rules configured, vehicles mapped, any telematics live, and then a back office track that gets finance connected, counting integration, automated coding, approval workflows, receipt capture. So like with that, we get a clean list of drivers and vehicles. Like our fleets are ready to roll in a week.
Great. I love that. I don't think we have any more questions unless there's any final points that you guys want to bring up.
Dylan, I did want to just, when we talk about everyone, if they haven't implemented all or some of these things, the the best part to start is just start on something and make incremental changes. So when we're speaking from applause and the psychology of what we're trying to think about of increasing positive behavior within your employees and operations, you may pull in your fleet metrics driving, or you're looking at spend within Coast, see where you're at today, do that quick audit, and then just make a goal for some incremental small change. And that's next week or next month's goal. And then do it again the following month or week, however you're measuring it, or quarter. I think so many times we think we just can implement something, walk away, and everything corrects. But you should figure out where baseline is and then immediately set a next goal, an achievable goal, get everyone rallied behind it, let them know what the goal is, make that transparent, and then let everyone just watch together as a team they hit that goal. You don't have to go from 0 to 100 overnight. Build something out that is sustainable and something that everyone can care and get behind and feels is achievable, so that when they get that win, they want to repeat it and do it again and keep rising. And so our takeaway would 100% go measure yourself today, start implementing some of these things if you don't have them, and then set tangible goals and start measuring yourself so you can come back and report individually and as a company to yourselves every month on it.
I like that. We'll do one last question. Greg, curious, we've mentioned documented safety programs a couple of times. In your mind, what are one or two or three like critical things that someone needs to have in a documented safety program?
Yeah, I would say, what a carrier wants to see is a written fleet safety program. So what does that look like? In that program, it could be, we're doing annual driver trainings. We do vehicle inspection reports weekly, monthly, whatever it might be. Our company does company rollouts where the truck is leaving the yard. They're doing both blinkers, checking the brakes, making sure that that vehicle is ready to go out there to that day. And I would say a good estimator for to take back to your broker, your current agent is making sure they're filling out like a fleet supplemental. All of our clients have a fleet supplemental that answers a lot of these questions on it, that we can make sure the underwriter is seeing that. And I think sometimes that's missed. Sometimes you might get a general liability supplemental or a work comp supplemental, but I think having a supplemental that's dedicated to your team's fleet safety is ultra critical in making sure that that underwriter knows exactly what you're doing and can price for that account, and hopefully price very aggressively. So that would be something that I would say on that.
I think that's super helpful. Well, thanks everybody for the time today and showing up. I think this has been really helpful. If you hadn't had a chance, look through the fleet savings guide that we put together with all these fantastic partners. There's some great nuggets in there that you can probably use to improve on your fleet and hopefully save some money. Thanks to all the panelists today, and thank you for joining. Bye now.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Take care.